There are moments in life when the loudest truths are whispered in silence, when the universe pauses, not to withhold, but to invite us into deeper understanding. In these spaces between chaos and clarity, between question and answer, something sacred stirs. The stars don't shout their brilliance, yet they guide. The tide does not argue with the moon, yet it moves in faithful rhythm. So too, our lives unfold, not always in words, but in quiet transitions and unseen alignments, in the subtle turning of the soul. Perhaps it is in our stillness that we are most aligned with something divine. For what if the delays, the doubts, the detours were not setbacks, but sacred choreography, an invitation to listen before we speak, to understand before we act? There is a wisdom in restraint, a purpose in the pause. Because sometimes the silence isn't empty, it's a verse in the poem the universe is writing through you. There's something beautifully paradoxical about silence. We tend to associate it with emptiness, an absence of something, a lack of action, a pause in momentum. But I want you to consider this. What if silence isn't the absence of anything at all, but the presence of everything? Think about the last time you sat in complete stillness. No phone, no music, no conversation, just you, your breath, and the quiet. For some, that kind of silence can feel unsettling. We're conditioned to fill space, to respond quickly, to prove we're engaged, present, valuable. But what if the value isn't in how fast we speak, but how deeply we think before we do? In silence, something powerful happens. We begin to hear not just the world around us, but ourselves. The noise begins to fall away. The expectations, the pressure, the chaos, it fades. And beneath it all, a different kind of voice emerges. It doesn't shout. It doesn't compete. It waits, patiently, for us to notice it. That voice is clarity. That voice is intuition. That voice is you. When we rush to speak, we often do so from a place of ego, a desire to be heard, to be right, to be first. But wisdom rarely operates on urgency. It's not in a hurry to impress. It lives in the quiet corners of reflection. The space between what happens to us and how we choose to respond. Some of the most important things in life, things like trust, love, meaning, don't declare themselves loudly. They don't arrive with flashing lights. They unfold slowly like a sunrise. They ask us to be present, attentive, open. And silence is how we meet them on their terms. We often think that saying something, anything, is better than saying nothing at all. But let me offer a different perspective. There is great courage in restraint, great strength in patience. The ability to stay silent in a crucial moment isn't weakness. It's discipline, it's leadership, because silence allows us to observe before we act, to understand before we assume. In conversation, silence gives others space to be seen. In conflict, it diffuses escalation. In decision-making, it grants clarity. And in pain, silence can hold more healing than 1,000 well-meant words. When we hold space for silence, we're not stepping back, we're stepping in, into something deeper, into presence, into intentionality, into our role not just as speakers, but as listeners. And listening, true, active, empathetic listening, is where connection begins. I've watched leaders walk into rooms and say very little, and yet command the attention of everyone present. Not because of the volume of their voice, but because of the weight of their presence. And that weight is built in silence, in the unseen hours of thought, reflection, and inner work. It's forged in quiet moments of asking, who am I in this? What does this require of me? Not just as a professional, but as a human being. When you are silent, you become more attuned to the moment. You begin to notice subtleties. The things that were buried under noise begin to rise. Ideas, solutions, realizations. Stillness becomes the meeting place of intuition and truth. It's not that you're doing nothing, you're doing something deeply necessary. You're tuning in. Silence is where integrity begins. Because in those moments, when no one is watching, when there's nothing to perform for, that's when we meet ourselves honestly. That's when we ask, what do I actually believe? What truly matters here? What is the right thing to do? Not for approval, not for applause, but because it's right. This is where trust is built, within. And only when we've developed that trust in ourselves, through quiet self-honesty, can we offer it to others. So the next time you feel pressure to fill the silence, to say something clever, to offer an immediate response, ask yourself, is this the moment to speak? Or is this the moment to listen? Let that be your pause. Let that be your power. Because silence isn't empty. It's the most honest part of you, finally being heard. We live in a world obsessed with momentum. Keep moving, keep climbing, keep achieving. And if there's a pause, a delay, a detour, we panic. We think something's gone wrong. We assume we've lost time, lost ground, maybe even lost ourselves. But the truth is, not every pause is a problem. Sometimes a pause is exactly what's needed for the next note to make sense. And like any great piece of music, it's not just the sound that creates beauty, it's also the silence between the sounds. The rests are just as intentional as the melody. The space between the beats gives the whole piece its shape, its meaning. And if you rush it, if you try to fill every space with noise or motion, you actually rob the music of its depth. The same is true of your life. We've all had those moments where nothing seems to be happening. You've done the work, you've made the effort, you've shown up. And yet, the phone doesn't ring. The answer doesn't come. The breakthrough feels out of reach. And it's in those moments that we start to question ourselves. We wonder, did I take the wrong path? Should I have done something different? Am I being left behind? But maybe that space isn't a sign of failure. Maybe it's a sign of preparation. There's a difference between being stuck and being still. Stillness is intentional. It's a moment of alignment. It's what happens before a wave crests, before a seed sprouts, before a great idea comes to life. And often it's in that quiet space, the one we resist, that something deeper is taking root. You see, life doesn't rush the meaningful stuff, it grows it. Carefully, patiently, purposefully. Just because you can't see the movement doesn't mean it isn't happening. Some of the most transformative processes happen in silence. Healing, maturing, evolving. None of that makes noise. But it changes everything. And the irony is, if we try to skip the stillness, we often delay the very thing we're chasing. We miss what the pause was trying to teach us. It's just, we leap too soon, we answer too fast, we speak without listening. And what we end up with is noise, not music. The challenge is trusting the pause. That's not easy, especially when we're wired to measure our worth by output, by speed, by comparison. But your value doesn't disappear when the motion stops. Who you are is not defined by how fast you move. It's revealed by how well you wait. Waiting doesn't mean doing nothing. It means preparing, reflecting, strengthening your foundation, asking better questions, listening more deeply. There's a kind of wisdom that only comes from honoring the timing of things, instead of trying to control them. Sometimes the world goes quiet so we can finally hear what really matters. What really matters. Sometimes the doors don't open yet, because we're not ready to walk through them. And sometimes the delay isn't punishment. It's protection. It's grace. It's giving you the space to become the kind of person who can carry what's next with integrity. Think about the trees. They don't bloom all year. Winter doesn't mean the tree has failed. It means it's getting ready, strengthening its roots, conserving energy. And when the season turns, it's ready to burst into life again, stronger and more grounded than before. Our lives follow seasons too, but we often resist the winters. We want everything to be spring, but growth doesn't work that way, and meaning doesn't happen on our timeline. It happens on life's, and that's a good thing. Because the timing of your life is more intelligent than you are. It's not random, it's not off schedule, it's exact. And when you begin to trust that, when you begin to see the pauses not as wasted time, but as sacred preparation, you stop panicking in the silence. You start listening. You start aligning. And here's what's truly powerful. When the time does come to act, to speak, to step forward, you'll do it with clarity, with intention, with a deeper connection to who you are and what you're here for. And what you're here for, not because you filled every moment with motion, but because you honored the space in between. So the next time life quiets down, pause with it, lean into it, ask what it's trying to prepare you for. You're not being held back, you're being held in place, so something greater can take form. Sometimes, what feels like a delay is really divine timing, waiting for you to become ready. Have you ever been in a moment where everything inside you is screaming to react, to defend, to prove, to correct, to be heard, yet something quieter, something deeper, asks you to wait, to hold your words, not because you have nothing to say, but because you know that not every moment deserves a response. We live in a culture that rewards quick replies, fast opinions, instant reactions. We're expected to have something to say about everything, all the time. If we're silent, people assume we're disengaged, indifferent, or weak. But real strength doesn't always speak. Real strength often watches, listens, and waits. There's a kind of listening that has nothing to do with ears. It's not about waiting your turn in a conversation, and it's definitely not about crafting a response while someone else is still speaking. I'm talking about a deeper kind of listening, the kind that requires silence not just around you, but within you. Within you. And here's the thing. Most of us don't know how to do that, not because we're incapable, but because we've been taught that insight always comes from outside. We look for answers in books, podcasts, other people's opinions. And yes, there's wisdom there, but there's also wisdom inside of you. And often, the only way to hear it is to be quiet long enough to listen. We're uncomfortable with stillness. We fill silence with noise, not just out in the world, but in our own minds. We keep ourselves busy, distracted, stimulated, because the moment we slow down, the moment we go quiet, all the voices we've been pushing aside start to rise up. Doubts, fears, regrets, but also, if we're willing to stay with it, truth, clarity, and calling. That's the voice I want you to hear. The voice that doesn't shout, the one that speaks when everything else goes still. It's the voice of your soul, the one that knows who you are when you forget, the one that's not swayed by trends or approval or fear. But to hear that voice, you have to get quiet. You have to get quiet. Not just on the outside, but in here where the real conversations happen. When we stay silent, not to avoid the world, but to understand ourselves, something profound happens. We begin to distinguish between what we've been told to want and what we actually desire. We start noticing the difference between performance and purpose, between reacting and responding. And that awareness, it doesn't just change how we lead, it changes how we live. Listening in this way takes practice. It's not something you master in a weekend. Because real listening requires you to let go of the need to be right. It asks you to get comfortable with not having the answer right away. And that's hard, especially in a world that celebrates certainty and speed. But life isn't a quiz. You don't get points for answering fast. You grow when you learn to sit with the question. You grow when you learn to self-rate as why am I really here? Sometimes it's what am I not seeing? Or what truth have I been avoiding because I'm afraid of where it might lead? These are not surface level questions. They won't show up in the middle of a meeting or a scrolling session on your phone. They arrive in the quiet, when you're brave enough to ask, and brave enough to wait for the answer. And often, the first thing you'll hear isn't the answer. It's discomfort. It's the noise of everything you've buried. But if you keep listening, if you stay in the silence a little longer than is comfortable, eventually something deeper rises, insight, direction, a still, small knowing, the kind of wisdom that doesn't just give you a plan, but reminds you who you are. We think that leadership is about having a voice. But before you can speak with impact, you have to know what you believe. Before you can inspire others, you have to be anchored in something real. And that anchoring doesn't happen when we're reacting. It happens when we're reflecting. So we listen. We go inward. Not to escape the world, but to return to it with clarity. Because the more attuned you are to your inner voice, the more clearly you can hear others. The less noise you carry inside, the more presence you offer in every conversation. People can feel that. They can feel when you're with them, not just physically, but emotionally, energetically. Phone. You begin to listen not to reply, but to understand. You start asking questions not to control the conversation, but to learn. And when you finally do speak, it's not out of impulse. It's not to fill a gap. It's because something real needs to be said. And when that happens, when your words come from alignment, from truth, they land differently. They don't just pass through the ears. They stay with people. They move something in them. That's the kind of voice we need more of. Not the loudest one in the room, but the most grounded. most grounded, not the most polished, but the most sincere, a voice shaped not by pressure, but by presence, a voice that listens long before it speaks. And here's the paradox. The better we listen, the more powerful our voice becomes. Because it's no longer just a reaction to the world, it's a reflection of something deeper, something timeless, something true. So don't fear the silence. Make space for it. Lean into it. Because the voice that will guide you forward is already within you, waiting to be heard. There's this strange belief that silence in a moment of conflict or confusion is a failure to act. But it's actually one of the most powerful actions we can take. Because silence, especially in moments charged with emotion, creates space. And that space is where discernment can breathe. When we respond too quickly, when we fire back from a place of ego or insecurity, we may win the moment, but we often lose the meaning. We forget that just because something provokes us doesn't mean it's ours to carry. Not every comment deserves your energy. Not every situation benefits from your voice. Sometimes the greatest contribution you can make is your restraint. It's easy to speak when you're angry. It's easy to interrupt. It's easy to fill the room with sound to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty. But what's not easy, what's far more meaningful, is learning to tolerate the tension without rushing to resolve it, to sit with the discomfort, to let the noise pass through without becoming a part of it. This isn't about being passive. It's about being intentional. It's about being intentional. Knowing when your words will build something and when they'll simply add more weight to an already chaotic room. There are moments where saying something might feel good in the short term, but silence serves better in the long run. Because silence, in the right context, is not withdrawal. It's leadership. There's a reason why the wisest people you've met tend to speak slowly, deliberately. They're not in a hurry to prove themselves. They understand that influence isn't measured by how often we talk, but by how deeply we understand. And understanding starts with listening. Listening is not just waiting for your turn to talk. Listening is surrender. It's choosing to put your ego aside long enough to see the world through someone else's eyes. And that kind of presence, that kind of humility, can't happen if we're constantly preparing our next line. When you stay silent in the right moments, you're not giving up your power, you're channeling it. You're conserving energy for the words that actually matter. And the words that matter are the ones spoken with purpose, not impulse. It takes real courage to let someone else finish, to resist the temptation to interrupt, to say to yourself, I don't have to fix this, I don't have to control this, I don't even have to respond right now. Because often, what we think is a moment demanding our reaction is really an invitation to grow in awareness. There's a sacred pause between stimulus and response. That pause is where choice lives. It's where you get to decide who you want to be in this moment, not based on your emotions, but based on your values. And if you miss that pause, you miss the opportunity to lead from intention instead of impulse. Saying never speak. I'm saying don't confuse urgency with importance. Don't confuse volume with value. There are times to speak up boldly and clearly, but those words land better when they come from a place of clarity, not chaos. Think about the people who have left the biggest mark on your life. Chances are, it wasn't because they always had something to say. It was because when they did speak, their words carried weight. Their presence made you feel seen. And part of that presence came from their willingness to not speak when it wasn't needed. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't have to explain yourself to everyone who misunderstands you. Sometimes your silence is the most powerful boundary you can set. And sometimes walking away from the noise is the most courageous stand you can take. So when the world around you is loud, when egos are flaring, tensions are rising, and everyone's talking over each other, don't be afraid to be the one who listens. Don't underestimate the power of the pause, and don't mistake stillness for weakness. Because when you can stay quiet in the noise, you don't just find your voice, you discover its purpose. We spend so much of our lives looking for purpose, as if it's out there somewhere, hidden behind the next achievement, the next opportunity, the next to right a decision. And yet, purpose doesn't usually announce itself in grand, dramatic moments. More often, it begins quietly, in the dark. Gently, beneath the surface, almost unnoticed, like a seed. The thing is, most of us are taught to look for purpose in productivity. We ask, what am I doing? What have I accomplished? What can I show for myself? But purpose isn't always revealed through action. Sometimes it grows in the spaces where nothing seems to be happening at all. There are seasons in life when everything slows down, when doors close, when momentum stalls, when the path ahead looks foggy at best. These moments can feel like failure. They can feel like we've lost our way. But what if those moments aren't setbacks at all? What if they're sacred? What if they're doing something important inside us, something that can't be rushed? Silence has a way of drawing us inward. And it's in that inner space, when the noise quiets down and we're left with our own thoughts, that something deeper can begin to take root. It might not look like progress. It might not show up on a resume or a highlight reel, but that doesn't mean nothing's happening. In fact, those still uncomfortable moments might be the most important ones of all. Think about it. When a tree grows, its roots deepen long before you see any branches. When a building goes up, the foundation is laid quietly underground before anything reaches the surface. Why would our lives be any different? We don't always realize it in real time, but some of the most defining periods in our lives are the ones that feel the least glamorous. The nights spent wrestling with doubt. The days when everything feels uncertain. The moments when we're forced to stop doing and start being. That's where the work happens. The kind of work that shapes character, not just performance. You don't find your purpose in the spotlight. You grow into it in the shadows. And what's amazing is how, when you finally look back, you start to see how everything fits. The heartbreak, the delay, the confusion, the silence. It was all doing something. It was preparing you. It was refining you. It was refining you. It was shaping you into someone who could carry what you were meant to carry. But in the moment, all we want is to move forward. We want clarity. We want direction. And sometimes we get frustrated when we can't see what's next. But just because the next step isn't clear yet doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're still growing. And growth doesn't happen on demand. It happens in layers over time, often invisible from the outside. We're taught to value speed, to chase goals, to check boxes. But purpose doesn't work like that. It's not a finish line you cross. It's a way of living. A way of listening to what life is asking of you and showing up with integrity whether the world is watching or not. And silence is part of that process. The stillness, the waiting, the not knowing, that's where you begin to ask deeper questions. That's where you start to get honest with yourself about what actually matters. That's where the roots grow. When everything feels still, ask yourself, what is this moment teaching me? What part of me is being invited to grow? What do I need to release in order to receive what's next? These aren't easy questions, but they're the ones that lead us home to ourselves. The truth is, purpose isn't something we find. It's something we become, and becoming takes time. It takes space, takes silence. It takes moments when you stop chasing the life you think you're supposed to live and start listening to the life that's been quietly calling you all along. So if you're in a quiet season, if things feel slow or uncertain, don't panic. Don't rush to fill the space. Honor it. Let it do what it's here to do. Let it deepen you. Let it soften you. Let it shape the kind of person who can carry purpose not as a title or a task, but as a truth. Because purpose doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes it only speaks when everything else falls silent. So don't overlook the silence. That stillness you're resisting might just be the soil where your purpose is finally learning how to grow. It's easy to forget, in the rush of daily life, that we're part of something so much bigger than ourselves. We get caught up in our own challenges, our own timelines, our own little corners of the world. And in that narrow focus, we start to believe that everything depends on us, that we have to figure it all out, fix everything, always know the answer. But the truth is, you're not doing this alone. You never have been, because whether you see it or not, you are part of a larger story, something vast, intricate, beautifully interconnected. Imagine, just for a moment, that your life is a single note in a grand symphony. On its own, maybe it seems small, maybe even insignificant. But in context, in the full arrangement, it matters deeply. It contributes to the rhythm, the texture, the feeling of the whole piece. If you were to remove that note, a song would lose something. The melody wouldn't feel quite right. That's how important you are, even when it doesn't feel like it. We often underestimate the impact of our presence. We assume that if we're not doing something dramatic or visible, then we're not contributing. But contribution isn't always loud. It's not always center stage. Sometimes it's the quiet support, the unseen effort, the silent strength that holds space for others. Sometimes staying grounded in who you are, staying true to your values in a world that's constantly shifting, is the most powerful thing you can offer. And this is where silence becomes sacred again. Because when you choose to be still in a world that's rushing, when you choose to listen in a world that's shouting, when you choose to wait instead of react, you're not just preserving your own integrity, you're offering something rare and needed to the collective. You're anchoring the moment. You're helping restore balance. It's like the pause in a song that makes the next note hit harder, or the stillness in a dance that makes the movement more meaningful. Your moments of restraint, your decision to step back and reflect instead of charge ahead, those are not empty pauses. They're part of the rhythm. They give shape to the whole. There are times when we feel invisible, like we're not doing enough, being enough, achieving enough. But what if you're exactly where you need to be? What if your role right now isn't to move the spotlight, but to hold the space so others can find their voice? What if your silence is part of someone else's growth, just as theirs is part of yours? That's the thing about being connected. We don't always get to see the immediate result of our contribution, but that doesn't mean it's not real. A single kind word, a quiet decision made with integrity, the simple act of being present, these things ripple outward. They affect people in ways we may never fully understand. You are not the whole song, but the song is not whole without you. The more we begin to see ourselves as part of a greater whole, the more intentional we become. We stop needing constant validation because we understand our value isn't in what we can prove. It's in what we can prove. It's in what we quietly carry. We begin to trust that even in moments of silence, something meaningful is unfolding. You may never get credit for some of your most important contributions. No one may notice the time you held your tongue when it would have been easier to lash out. Or the way you listened, really listened when someone needed to feel heard. But those moments, those small, silent offerings, are the threads that hold everything together. So when you're unsure of your place, when you wonder if what you're doing matters, remember this: you are not here by accident. Your timing, your presence, your unique expression, none of it is random. You are a note in the song of this world, and the song needs every note to be whole. You don't have to be the loudest. You don't have to lead the melody. You just have to be true to the note that is yours to play. Because in the end, the harmony of life is not created by those who shout the most, but by those who listen, who wait, and who offer their presence with intention. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stay in tune.